Alright, thank you so much for joining in. Today we're going to understand why countries devalue their currency. We're also going to get a glimpse of what inflation is, understand the barter system because that's where it all starts. And by understanding these two concepts, we will get an understanding of countries and how they devalue their currency. So let's just jump right in. If you're new to the channel, I'd like to welcome you. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy watching this video. So let's get started. So let's start off all the way back in the day. So let's take an example of three different characters, Mike, Joe and Larry, and each one of them were able to provide one particular item that was of key importance. So Mike would be rice, Joe would be bricks, and Larry would be clothing. Now this covers the essentials, food, clothing and shelter. And what they would do is that since one village was able to produce food very well and the other village was able to provide for clothing, and if all villages were close to each other, they would have a market and they would trade their food for Joe's clothing and Joe's clothing for shelter, such that all villages equally had all the essentials required. So let's proceed a little further. So once again, Mike was able to trade rice, Joe bricks and Larry clothing, and because of which what happened is that there was difficulty in establishing the fair market value of each item, because clothes could take time to make. At least back in the day they took a lot of time to make, and the process of making bricks was also introduced very late, and a farmer would have to wait months and months for the right conditions to go ahead and make rice. But each of them thought that their product was of superior value and wanted to establish a fair trade. So where that comes in is, let's look at the start of it once again. So initially Mike's village was able to look at some agricultural improvements, because of which in the same amount of time they were able to produce more rice. And to benefit every other village, what they did was they came to a fair trade agreement between each other, and Mike would trade his product, which is rice, for Larry's clothing. So of course their village was self-sufficient to the point where they could start trading the rice, so they would trade rice for clothes. But then what happened was that this village, Mike's village, thought that the value of rice was superior, and they decided to impose an additional fee, saying that we will only provide one bowl of rice for 2 pieces of clothing. So the value went from 1:1 to 1:2, which means that for each article or each bowl of rice, Larry's village would have to give 2 pieces of clothing instead of 1. And that's when things became disproportionate, and eventually villages realized that they need one common standard or one common metric to go ahead and measure this. And that's when money came into the system. So now let's take a look at what happened. For every bowl of rice, they were willing to take one article of clothing. But now, for one bowl of rice, they wanted 2 articles of clothing, which means the exchange rate just doubled. And in order to make things easier and streamlined, they introduced a coin. And this coin has a particular value. So let's assume that the coin's value is decided by the second village. So they decided the value would be 1 coin for every 10 bricks. Now you can think of each individual, Mike, Larry, Joe, as 3 different countries that decided to do business and trade with one another because they realized that there is an abundance of natural resources in their own country that is different from the resources in the other person's country. So looking at each equation objectively, for 1 coin, one village was willing to give away 10 bricks. For the same coin, another village might be willing to give something else. So let's look at our initial equation. Mike was willing to give away 1 bowl of rice in exchange for 2 articles of clothing, and the same would translate to 10 bricks from Joe. To take that a step further, let's look at this equation once again. So one bowl of rice was worth 1 coin, which means that one bowl of rice, which was worth 2 articles of clothing, is worth 1 coin, because 2 articles of clothing is worth 1 bowl of rice, and a bowl of rice is worth 1 coin. And let's take one more step further. So one bowl of rice is worth 2 articles of clothing, which is actually worth 10 bricks for 1 coin. So you're seeing a difference in value here. You're not seeing 1 brick for 1 article of clothing for 1 bowl. You're seeing different values because the value of natural resources is also different. The method of making and preparing and getting the rice versus getting a complete finished product of clothing and finished bricks, that's also different. And back at the time, and we all know this, that the supply and demand of resources determines its value. And in this case, 1 bowl of rice would give you 2 articles of clothing, which would give you 10 bricks, which would all be worth just 1 coin. So typically what happens in a situation like this is, assuming that there is a lot of supply of bricks, a country or an economy, or let's say even a company, would go ahead and try to match the demand in the market, or increase the demand in the market, or come out with a different kind of brick that solves a different pain point. And what you'll also see is that when there is innovation in each field, for example, let's say there are agricultural developments and it was easier to produce rice, and not just target 1 or 2 villages, but also target 10 to 15 different villages. And what if you brought in logistics, wherein the same bowl of rice could be transported not just to villages that are close by, but villages that are far away also, thereby bringing back more resources? What if instead of brick, there could be a different material that can be used to build houses and everything else? So the prices of various items, and based on demand and supply of those items, and based on the technology available to make production easy, to make logistics easy, to make the delivery process easy, that would determine its pricing. And countries typically at this point, especially in the case where 1 coin equals 10 bricks, if they were to bring out a method wherein this village can start producing their own rice, and rice from village D would be able to compete with rice from village A, then there would be a supply-demand war that's happening between 2 villages. And typically, there are only 1 or 2 metrics that you can focus on. Either the quality of the rice, in this case, is better, or the pricing of the rice, in this case, is lower, which would cause people to buy. So it's either pricing or it's the value. Now, countries would typically look at an equation like this and realize that because there's a disparity, each coin is worth differently for each different good. And based on the value of that coin, the market price of various products and services are priced. And hence, countries would automatically accept the market rate, and thereby that would devalue or overvalue the currency. Thank you so much for watching. If you got some value out of this video, please go ahead and like this video and share it with just one person who you think this video can help. Thank you for watching. Go ahead and subscribe.